Two other questions. Our next question, in fact, is from Phil Jones.
How appropriate is it for the Australian government to describe the West Bank and East Jerusalem as disputed territories rather than occupied territories? And doesn't this reinforce the notion that might is right in international disputes?
Start with Dee Madigan.
Okay, what this does illustrate is just how powerful words are. I know that Brandis said that occupied was a loaded term, and it is. But so too is disputed, because it says that you think that there is value on both sides of the argument. What we've done now by having two possible words we can use, is every single time something like this happens, there will be debate overseas about which word Australia is using. It's opened up a diplomatic minefield that is completely unnecessary and will probably hurt us.
Josh, let's hear what this actually means.
Well, as the Prime Minister, as Julie Bishop, as George Brandis has said, Australia hasn't changed its position because success, as far as I can recall, Liberal ministers and Prime Ministers have never called it occupied East Jerusalem, and these are subject to negotiations.
No, so can we clarify this? Because in his initial comments, George Brandis certainly didn't distinguish between other occupied territories, that is on the West Bank, for example. Are you now clarifying this and saying he was really only referring to East Jerusalem? Does that mean, in fact, that the West Bank settlements are on occupied territory?
Well, the point about the West Bank and East Jerusalem is that they're going to be part of a deal, and this is our main message.
No, but just very specifically on this question of what's occupied and what is disputed.
Right. Well,
are the West Bank settlements on occupied territory?
No, these territories that we are discussing that were taken by Israel after the '67 war, when it was invaded by Syria, Jordan and Egypt, are now the subject of negotiation to try to get a peace treaty. So that doesn't distinguish between...
But very specifically,
it doesn't distinguish between West Bank...
Are they occupied or disputed territory?
Because we are going down the path saying all of these areas need to be the subject of negotiation.
Yes, but are they occupied or disputed? Does Australia think of the settlements as well as East Jerusalem as being on occupied territory?
As Julie Bishop has said, we don't accept Bob Carr's assessment that all these settlements were illegal. And if you go to our main point here, which is you're only going to get peace in that part of the world if the two sides sit down.
Okay, now, I still don't think you've quite answered that question.
Well, I haven't given you the answer, Tony, that you would like. But what I'm saying is that the only...
But it's a simple question.
Well, you've heard how difficult international law is. We believe as a government that Security Council Resolution 242, which was passed after the '67 war, and 338, which happened after the 1973 war, are the basis for a negotiated solution.
Okay, all right, let's hear from Ed Husick and then the other panellists.
Well, the person who first voiced this view, which, if it is the case, Josh, that, you guys were using these terms behind the scenes, no one else really knew because it came as a shock. And when we first heard that this was the new term, it was being expressed by Attorney General Brandis, who'd done such a fantastic job in championing Reform to Racial Discrimination Act that he decided, well, what's next? I'm going to go on the international sphere and I'm going to inject myself in the most controversial and sensitive issue going in the Middle East. I'm going to change the definition of these territories. I mean, that's worked out a treat.
Well, the thing is...
The actual thing itself is the term occupation is not pejorative. It's an internationally legal concept. It refers to areas that are under physical control that are beyond Israel's 1948 borders. So it's not designed to be a gotcha moment of describing or assigning certain rights. It's basically identifying what the rest of the world has classed it as. I mean, if the US, the strongest friend of Israel, is still using the term occupied, and we have our own Attorney General, deciding to class it differently, what is going on? And the consequence of this, putting everything else aside, is people feel so strongly about this that it could actually have an impact on our economic interests. And no one wants that, and let's hope it doesn't get to that point. But we'd certainly hope the coalition, instead of playing...
You're talking about the possibility of some sort of trade sanctions against Australia.
And I guess the thing is, we'd hope that the word games that the opposition, or the coalition when they were in opposition, used to play, don't continue on in government because there's too much at stake, and they really have got to. They said they'd be the adults in the room, and this isn't really a demonstration of that virtue.
But it is worth pointing out that the Americans have said they haven't wanted to use the term occupied. Yes, it's in the Resolution 242 and 338, but when Madeleine Albright, who became the Secretary of State under Bill Clinton, a Democrat, when she was the ambassador to the United Nations for the United States, she said very specifically in 1994, we will not use that term occupied.
Let's